Hello, everybody. My name is Jared Haber. I am a recent PhD at UC Berkeley, Sociology, and now I'm going to be a postdoctoral fellow at Georgetown University. And this is my presentation for ASA, the American Sociological Association Roundtable on School Contexts. So, hi, everybody, and let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, and here is my presentation. Okay, so here, so you've got to meet me, and now I'm going to be on the side of the screen with you. So this is one of my ongoing projects. It is essentially my dissertation. There's also a forthcoming article in Sociology of Education by the same title. This project has a lot of different arms to it, tentacles of the octopus, if you will. This is kind of the main work, and I'm going to try to present it efficiently to you. So a computational analysis of charter schools, identities, and stratification. All right, so as you know, charter schools are a increasingly big deal on the American educational landscape in the last 25, 30 years. The first laws were passed in 92. That's when the first schools were opened in Minnesota. California was not far after that. And you see here a map of the density of charter schools, the proportion of all schools in that state that are charter schools. This is not the density of proportion of students. This would look slightly different that way. California is still very dense, but Arizona would be the densest as far as proportion of students that enroll in charter schools. Yeah, so 92 all the way through 95, and they've been getting increasingly popular, don't use that word, and they've been tripling or even quadrupling in some years ever since the mid 90s. There's a big boom in the early 2000s, and in the 2010s, there was kind of a gradual slowing down of the rate of charter school founding. There's still an increasing proportion of the sector that are charter schools. But yeah, there's some evidence of the trend kind of leveling off in popularity, perhaps due to lack of teachers to start them. It's very demanding work. Okay, so that's just the context here. And a charter school, by the way, just to give you a broad definition, is a publicly funded school. They're funded the same way traditional public schools are, by per pupil state allocation of funds. They're authorized every 3 to 5 years, depending on your district, usually by the school district, but sometimes by universities or other local actors. And they are more private in operation. So in many states, the schools have wide curricular freedom. They are required to take state exams and are held accountable to those in principle. But largely their workforces are less unionized and less certified. Okay, so that's just a broad, big picture for you to get started. And yeah, the next sort of broad social context piece here is the increasing proportion of schools in the US, and this is showing all public schools, that are segregated by race. So intense segregation means that they're 90 to 100% of a given race. So here we aggregate Latino, Asian, Black, American Indian, and mixed race into one big category. Non-white is their label for it, versus white students. And you see that the portion of schools since the late 80s that are intensely segregated into non-white student bodies has been steadily increasing, and this has still been going up. Whereas interestingly enough, the proportion of schools that are intensely segregated but just white has been going down. So there is kind of some increased contact in mostly white schools, but much less so for all of the ethnic minorities over time. And in this trend, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that charter schools are actually the worst of them. So this is from an Associated Press study. 17% of charter schools are over 99% non-white. So like, what do they call this? Apartheid schools is one term for it, compared to 4% for traditional public schools. And this is, no matter how you slice it up, over time, this trend has been increasing. And charter schools have been more segregated than traditional public schools. So what's the mechanism for that is kind of my entry point into this literature. I provide kind of a novel way to look at how this might be happening based on somewhat on parents' choices, but largely on sort of broader demographic trends in charter schools. All right, so broadly, what am I asking here? This is the very broad question I'm trying to answer. Do distinct educational ideologies cause parents to self-sort by race and class? In other words, does the language and potentially practice, but I can't speak to that. Does the language around education, its purposes, its mission, attract parents by niche, by race and class sort of group? So you could imagine archetypally low-income communities of color as one kind of group of people. And then you've got affluent white families as another group. That's tradition. That's kind of how it breaks down, but you can think of it a bit more dynamically if you want. Does the language around educational ideology break people down by group? Does it increase segregation? Ultimately, that's what I'm asking. It's a broader outcome here. The more specific question I have is, what's the relationship between a charter school's race and class composition, and its emphasis on IBL, inquiry-based learning? This is an acronym you'll see all throughout this presentation. And I'll motivate why I choose this particular educational ideology. Inquiry-based learning is, yeah, my question is, does that separate people as like a specific sort of language or idea based on race and class at the school and district levels? All right, so how do I answer that question? I use this really rich big data from charter school websites, all of them. So here's some examples. Here's a KIPP school. There's another one from Ann Arbor. Yeah, a variety of names here, Public School Academy. This is also a charter. One more, and one more. Just to give you a sense of the diversity, there's zero consistency in structure, but typically they talk about their mission on the front page or the About Us page. The information is often kind of buried in there, but ultimately we're looking for something like this. Kind of scroll down the About Us page on this particular school, and what I'm most interested in are these values, these kind of ideology about what learning is for, what's the purpose of it. So ultimately, I would want to pull out this information, but because these websites are so messy, I just use the entire website, which is almost entirely a self-description, has some other stuff too. Here's another example. And just from these two examples, you see there's something about innovative nature-based learning and then something about urban students needing support. This is typical. This is kind of the polarity in most of these charter school websites that to me, I think suggests a race and class-based appeal. Are they talking more about support in urban areas and more about innovation and nature in suburban and white communities? It seems that way, but I'm trying to test whether that's a robust association using this data. So yeah, the biggest thing is website self-descriptions for all charter schools, about 7,000 of them. I have a directory of schools from the education department, Common Core of data in particular, on free and reduced price lunch, which is how I measure, as a proxy for poverty, my measure of class, and student demographics. This is arguably more reliable data. This is a little bit messy, but it's the best we can do at a broad level. Yep, what I just said. And then community information from the American Community Survey on race and class education. And there's a lot more data I could use, but I keep it fairly simple in the ultimate analysis maintained by the Census Bureau. Now lastly, education outcomes, in particular math and reading language arts. These are the mechanism for accountability at the school level across the country. I just look at percent proficiency at the school level. Again, a little bit blurred, but best we can do for the entire country. And I really want that granular data, both good associations, and kind of try to break it down as much as I can. I get this from the EdFacts assessment data in the education department. So this is what the data basically look like. This is a word cloud. The most common words are bigger. The less common words are smaller, and it's arranged randomly. It's really just a visual way of getting a sense for what's in this text corpus. School is the biggest, the most common term, not a big surprise. They also talk a lot about programs, academics, community staff, children, contact work, etc. So this is like kind of ritualistic language. Every school needs to talk about these things. The role of the state, the role of activities, something about science most of the time. So this is not probably going to differentiate schools I want to get at something a bit sharper that will do a better job of separating different kinds of communities, just to test my theory that the language used to describe educational ideology uh, allows parents a mechanism to sort themselves out on a cultural or status basis, which leads to segregation. Okay, a little bit more about my methods. First up, I do text analysis using a custom dictionary for inquiry-based learning, IBL, and then word embeddings as well to try to map out the relationships between words and get a validated dictionary for words related to inquiry-based learning. You'll see a little bit more about that. Next stage, doing some mixed effects regression models. This is a pretty robust method. However, since I just have data for charter school identities at one point in time, which is gathered in May 2018, this is mostly a cross-sectional analysis. There's some caveats there, but yeah, a robust cross-sectional analysis ultimately has a fixed effects portion to account for consistency within school districts and charter school management organizations, and a random effects portion as well. Now, yes, what I'm trying to do is examine relationships between their identities in school and district class and race composition. The district demographics is an alternative mechanism. I'm thinking that, yes, I could look at how the educational ideologies used by the school influence their school demographics, but presumably there's also a relationship between the people in the community and what portion of them and what type come to a given school. For a school in a Black neighborhood to end up with mostly Black students is less surprising than a differential there, which I also analyze. Okay, and clustering by state and CMO and school district as well, right, to account for similarities within, based on state policy, based on charter management organization sort of missions, as well as based on school district policy and demographic trends. All right, so word embeddings is one of those popular natural language processing tools, which I apply here. This is the dictionary I came up with. The bold words are the ones I started with. I use the word-to-vec algorithm, and these distances are based on t-SNE. T-distributed stochastic neighbor embeddings, I think is what that stands for. The dimensions don't really mean anything. It's just a way of representing in 2 dimensions the 300 dimensions in the word embedding model itself. So maybe I can back up just a second and say that word embeddings is a method of representing relationships between words in a corpus. So in our case, I start with a couple of words and I say, hey, based on their co-occurrences with other words across this corpus, across all these schools, what are other words that tend to occur in similar contexts, which implies they have similar meanings, and the cultural relationship there is embedded, is implied, and has been supported by a lot of different studies. So in this case, some other words I find that are relevant: hands-on, constructivism, critical thinking, and they kind of loosely cluster in this space by their meaning. It's not too important here, but let's see, experimentation is close to expeditions and inquiry-based. That makes sense. Experiential is closer to integrative and student-centered. Yeah, maybe so. But anyway, you get a sense for the words and how they're distributed over space. This is just a model for how I create the dictionary. And that allows me to create something like this. This is a representation of school philosophy or identity across all the US. I simply I take 2 measures. I don't actually use this in this study. It's just a kind of a heuristic. You could imagine that the schools that are more orange are more traditionalist in their focus, and more blue is more progressive, which is sort of an inspiration for how I end up choosing IBL as a measure. But yeah, so this is kind of just to give you a sense of what the data is I'm actually looking at. And the bigger bubbles are bigger schools. There's a variety of identities in here, and I measure it using the text on the websites, in short. Okay, right, so here's the results of the mixed effects regressions. Regression coefficients. Let's see, okay, so we sent 4 students, and this is impact on IBL. inquiry-based learning, the proportion of words in the website that come from the dictionary of selected terms, which is what I showed you in that visual a minute ago. Right, so the more poor the student body is, the more, the less they use IBL language in the website. And this is a small on this graph, but it's actually statistically significant. Whereas percent poor in the school district also makes a big difference. The effect size is larger, but the standard deviation is much broader. So the net effect of these two things is about the same. Whereas for race at the district, here's the district actually, and here's the school level, has a more consistent and robust impact on IBL. Okay, so there's a strong association there. What else can we say here? It even holds net of academic quality. So there's a lot of, I guess, hand waving by everyone from legislators to parents to school people, school organizers maybe, that says that the school's scores would impact its status. Certainly people notice this, pay attention to some extent. But the question is whether that explains the demographic outcomes here, net of IBL. So the outcome in this graph is demographics. So you've got race at the top and poverty at the bottom. So IBL, which is logged here because it has decreasing significance as the proportion increases. Yeah, IBL has a significant negative impact, and that holds even when you take into account proficiency in math and reading. So yes, these things matter. Reading matters, has a bigger effect size than IBL does, but this effect is robust to even these considerations. So takes out a big alternative explanation here, which is that something else about these white schools that attracts white parents, their scores. Turns out that's not an adequate explanation for the self-sorting we're observing. The results in segregation. And math has actually a weaker effect than IBL does. Okay, so broad conclusions here. Yeah, so it does seem like based on this analysis, yes, I'm not looking at school choice data itself, I'm not looking at parents' preferences, but if you look at the school's identity and then the kind of people that end up enrolling there, it does suggest that there is some self-sorting going on with the ideology the school chooses and who it's appealing to, and actually who ends up enrolling there. So there is something distinct here about schools' innovations, attracting certain kinds of people, and reproducing inequality by segregating students into schools where they're more likely to be with students that are similar to them by race and class. So charter schools are innovating, it's actually results in a new mechanism for inequality. Yes, and despite what people say about academic quality, objective measures like percent proficiency in reading and math by any state standard, it's not as important compared to IBL, which is just, again, a single ideology, a particularly segregating one, but there are many more axes, or many more, what do you call it, categories or dictionaries or types of language schools can use that parents would pay attention to for sure by reading the website. Even though they read them very quickly, it turns out the language matters. Okay, yes, and like I said, this is not school choice data. We need direct observational and longitudinal data to answer these questions even more convincingly. If I had data on charter school website, the whole universe, not just from May 2018 when this is scraped, but for a series of years, I could make even more convincing claims, I think. Or if I had spent some time in schools observing what the stakeholders are advocating for, like where do these mission statements come from? It's generally speaking kind of a school or staff level collaboration. Certainly it speaks to actual values people hold. But to observe like the extent to which they're considering neighborhood segregation or diversity or what kinds of students they're appealing to in particular, is there actually a consciousness of race and class? Like, is there an intentional attraction here, or maybe it's not, maybe it's just values that people share, which would nonetheless have the same outcome, but it speaks to, I think, how how it's coming about. Okay, and then just a step back even further, privatization educational policy. So charter schools are a form of educational privatization. They are essentially privately run but publicly funded schools. And what is all that autonomy giving them? Well, part of it, according to my study, is the freedom to advertise themselves in more unique and targeted ways, which if you've seen charter school websites and public school websites, they look very different. The charter school websites typically are more slick, streamlined, corporate, whereas public school websites are typically nested in kind of a school district website and a lot less information generally. So this form of privatization is encouraged by education policy, has been since George H.W. Bush, and there's No Child Left Behind policy in 2001, enacted in 2002. And the net result of this appears to be reproduction of inequality. There's a lot of other different studies that show this happening in different levels, but the more charter schools you tend to have at a national level, the bigger grows the education and learning gap. So what's one more outcome of this? Well, it seems to be retrenching existing divisions between race and class groups. Okay, so what are some solutions to this? Just a couple things to throw out there as possible policy levers we could implement to try to work against this current. Maybe charter schools are here to stay. What can we do about it that would have a decrease this kind of self-sorting and increasing segregation? How do we fight against that? We could require when each charter school gets reauthorized, they're authorized when they open, and then every 3 to 5 years after that. We could require them to show evidence of recruiting for diversity. So show the authorizers their marketing materials and their and just evidence to recruit a more diverse pool of students. How far would that go is maybe questionable. It's the kind of thing that could be ritualistic. Maybe they show the evidence without actually having any outcome of diverse schools. So here's one more idea. We could offer incentives for diverse schools. So if a school ends up having a more diverse student body within its walls compared to the community it's in, we could think about school districts or zip codes here. We could offer financial incentive for that. So not just calling themselves diverse by design, not just for having students of color in the middle of a community of color, or conversely for white schools in white neighborhoods, but actually being more diverse in the neighborhoods they're in. You could offer kind of a federal grant for that kind of thing. You can imagine that, just like there are federal grants for charter schools or schools doing STEM education. And there are programs like this in different communities, but to do it at a broad level, I think could have a helpful impact on decreasing segregation and mitigating this kind of self-sorting charter schools appear to be particularly effective at. Alrighty, so that is my talk. This is my contact information. I forgot to mention you can see these slides online. It was earlier in the talk. It's bit.ly/Haber-ASAIDS-2020. Yep, and you can also email me, go to my website for a lot more information about the work that I do, or just maybe share your ideas about what this problem is about, what we can do about it. Community engaged computational social science, that's what I'm all about, and I hope to hear from you about that. So thank you so much, and I'm gonna go ahead and exit out of here, stop the recording. Okay, see you.